I'm Hettige, I'm the president of the Sri Lanka Association. And as president, I want to ensure we actually grow with the community and bring insights and thoughts that actually provoke discussion. And USLA has an agenda in terms of, at least under my leadership, to move in that direction. This is the first in the talk of Knowledge for Thought series. I'm expecting this to be a bi-monthly event where we have the opportunity to invite members of our community and others to talk on topical areas of interest so we can uplift knowledge and awareness. And I'm very conscious that we have such a great community with so much insight and knowledge in various disciplines that we can actually bring to sort of energize and enrich the community. Today we have 4 young ladies. 2 are granddaughters of our founder members, so that is a special event speaking to us. USLA, I think, can do more for diversity within our community, not only learn from others, but ensure greater participation. We as a community, as I indicated, have well-learned community members covering all disciplines. Let's harness this talent. For us, to support such initiatives, USLA needs new members. I humbly request that if you're not a member, to join. And there's a book that is floating around. You can put your details and we can contact you. No payment required today. Next event is our variety show and Roti Party, which is on 7th of August. Please register your interest. Then on the 22nd of August, we are planting trees, native trees at Paraparamo as part of our sustainability agenda. And this we will continue as a sort of long-term objectives. As you know, and we will talk about environment today and how important that is for us and our survival of the planet and obviously to grow New Zealand. This will be followed by a cultural show and dinner dance with Desmond Silva joining us from Melbourne. So that will be a memorable event. And we have invited a number of dignitaries and hopefully they will be able to attend. Let me briefly introduce the speakers today. First is Saama is the granddaughter of founder member late Dr. Udawatta and granddaughter of Mrs. Bandit Dias, who is here today, past USLA president. She is a law student and will lead our talk today with a colleague, Mike Skate from the Corridor Capital Community Law Center, and Mike is the managing law partner in the Community Law Center. They will be talking to us about the value of legal documents such as enduring powers of attorney and wills, and how the law center can help us, and how you could create it. That's the important topic. The importance of having a will and enduring power of attorney. If you don't have one, start thinking about it. If you have one, you're doing well. Nimthara Udawatta will speak to us. Nimthara is a scientist and a hydrogeologist at GS Science. She has a Bachelor of Geology and Environment from Victoria University and a Master's in Environmental Science from Victoria University. She will talk to us on climate change. Climate change is a broad and complex issue, as everyone knows, and we are at a critical point in time where we need significant change before irreversible consequences. Now, the parents are here, and Kushal and Manaja, and Kushal is the Vice President of USLA. Then you will have Dushanka, who is the granddaughter of founder member late Hettige, my father. She's a New Zealand registered dietitian. She has a Bachelor of Science majoring in Human Nutrition and Master of Science majoring in Nutrition and Dietetics. Dushanka works at Wellington Hospital as a dietitian, clinical coordinator, as well as a clinical dietitian in medical oncology, rheumatology, intensive care specialties. She will talk to us on diabetes and nutrition today. So welcome Dushanka and everyone else. And last but not least, this is a very important topic. Nimesha is going to talk to us on mental well-being, and Nimesha is a mental health educator and well-being strategist. Her background is in nutrition and psychology, BSc Nutrition, PG in Psychology, and BSc Honors. She will be discussing why mental health is important and how mental health is actually very physical and how to ensure we care for ourselves and our loved ones. Nimesha is the daughter of our long-standing members, Ivan and Vipu, and she has a grandmother, Auntie Lata, to witness this great occasion. Thank you all. So without further ado, let's get the talks underway, and Saama, you come and introduce your topic and your colleague more formally, and both of you can address the crowd. Okay, thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Saama and I'm a law student at Victoria University and I'm also an intern at Udawatta Community Law Centre. And one of the things our law centre does is help people set up really important legal documents like wills and enduring powers of attorney. And Mike, our managing solicitor, is just going to tell you about those in a little bit more detail.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Skates. I'm the managing solicitor at the Udawatta Community Law Centre. Just very briefly, we're funded by the government to offer free legal services to those in the community who can't afford or have difficulties accessing justice. So our area covers from Granada North, northwards to the south side of the Hettige River. So we essentially cover the Udawatta areas. I've been in the job for about 3 years now, and when I arrived, it became very apparent to me that one of the things that our service was missing was delivering enduring powers of attorney and wills to the community. As I think one of your latest speakers will talk about dementia. Dementia is a big and growing problem in the community. And one of the reasons the government has created enduring powers of attorney is so that people, while they are well, can leave some documents that indicate what they would like their family or special persons to do for them if and when they should lose their capacity. And you can lose your capacity in a medical sense, and it's ultimately a doctor's decision, but it can come about through things like dementia or stroke, or you could be in a car crash and you could be in a coma in a hospital. So while you don't have the ability to speak or act for yourself, life will go on and medical people will need decisions to be made about care, and possibly family members will need to access banks or government departments to deal with your affairs while you're incapacitated. If you don't have an enduring power of attorney, you will hit the standard roadblock with most government departments, which is the Privacy Act or some sort of similar type of concern. They'll go, we can't talk to you, we need to talk to your mum and dad. You go, they can't because they're unconscious, because they're too ill. And you end up in a standoff. You're locked out of possibly your parents' relationship with the medical professionals or access to their money, if money's needed to do something. So a lot of people struggle with the concept of an enduring power of attorney, and many, especially older people, feel threatened by it. It's a process whereby you have to have a relationship with somebody who you trust enough to give you legal powers. And I like to equate it to a superpower, Superman, for example. So we all have legal powers. These are our legal superpowers. We have the ability to sign contracts, to get married, to get divorced, to decide to have an operation, or to decide not to have an operation, or any other medical procedure. So it's quite a powerful responsibility, and it's quite scary for some people to consider giving that away. So the documents for enduring powers of attorney, there are two of them. One is about your personal care and welfare, which very simply is about your medical issues, and the other is your property or money. So the government's decided in their wisdom to separate those two powers. So you have enduring powers of attorney in relation to property, personal care and welfare. So waving around a couple of questionnaires, which Saama has a whole pile of, and we'll leave those for you guys to have a look at later. They're quite interesting to read because the questionnaires highlight the things you need to consider, and who probably you're going to appoint as your attorney is the primary consideration, really, because A, it's a job with responsibilities. There are legal consequences for exercising those powers, also if somebody exercises them incorrectly. The law has said that for your personal care and welfare, you can appoint one attorney. And I like to think of that because that's the person who may be speaking with medical professionals about your particular health problem. And they want to talk to one person. They don't want 6 different members from a family turning up saying, well, I want this to happen, and no, none would want this to happen. So by authorising one person, the medical professionals can know who to talk to. And they won't be second guessing and answering to other people. When it comes to your property, you can appoint more than one. And we certainly recommend to people if there are significant assets that you consider appointing 2. That way they can keep an eye on each other. Because what we've discovered is that when there's money involved, people can become quite strange. If they've got access to somebody else's money, sometimes it changes them and they act in ways they may not have acted before. So at least if you have 2, if they're acting jointly, they can keep an eye on each other. So the issue for most people is understanding that you need to create these documents when you're well, when you're healthy, when you've got your capacity. Because once you lose your capacity, you can't make those legal decisions. In the eyes of the law, once a medical professional says that you don't understand the consequences of what you're saying or what will happen from those decisions, you can't change anything. So in an ideal world, everybody here who's over the age of 18 would have enduring powers of attorney, because it's not an old people's thing. You can be struck down by disease or illness or injury at any age. And increasingly people have strokes and aneurysms and all kinds of things in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s. If you wait until it happens, it's too late. So it's a conversation or a thought process that you have to go through. And the easiest decision really is, who am I going to give my superpowers to? The fear is, especially for older folks, that if I give them away now, powers, the concept that needs to be understood is you don't lose your powers, or the superpowers don't kick in for the other person until you're ill. So you can create them now, you put them in the cupboard somewhere, 10 years pass, 20 years pass, no problem. But if and when you're ill, and a doctor or a geriatrician certifies that you've lost your capacity, that letter, along with the enduring powers of attorney, activates the powers. So, fortunately, people get better sometimes. So even if the powers have been activated and you no longer can make the decisions, if and when you get better, the doctor, geriatrician, certified medical professional would write another letter and say, yes, this person does have their capacity back, they can make decisions, the powers are suspended. They return to you, and if time passes and you decide, oh, actually I don't want that person to be my attorney, you can fire them, you can change them. It's not carved in stone, it's a living document. People come in and out of our lives, relationships change. You might have appointed a son or a daughter to exercise your powers. Over time you've lost confidence in them, they've moved away, maybe they've got married to somebody you don't like. You can change those powers while you have capacity. You can't change them once you've lost capacity. So to go to a private law firm, a peer enduring powers of attorney would cost a couple about $2,000. So we offer these for free to those in the community who can't afford them. We can't test people. But they're a very valuable document, and once you have them created, you can tell your GP or your health clinic that these days they put it onto their computer system, so people will know that this document exists. So that way, if there's an accident of some sort, you can, the medical people can access their databases, and they'll know, oh, we should use this person and not that person. So here is a story that goes around the legal world. It's an American story, of course, where a gentleman was in a serious car crash, at the hospital, they're trying to decide what to do, and he's on life support. His wife arrives, the doctor has to talk to him, to her, and I'm pretty sure they decide to switch off the life support, and the gentleman passes. A couple of hours later, his girlfriend turns up at the hospital, and she's like, what have you done? He left his wife 2 years ago, we're going to understand that once the person has died, the enduring powers of attorney are worthless. And that's when a will comes in. And a lot of people get quite concerned about wills, and they think it's a very stressful thing to have to address. But what I like to suggest to people is all a will is a list. It's a list that you are leaving behind for people to tidy up your stuff. It's a list to say where you want to be buried, how you want to be buried, cremated or interred in a family plot, and where you would like your stuff to go to, and who you would like to do that job. So each will has a trustee and executor, and it can be one person or two, and again, we often suggest that you have two so they can keep an eye on each other. But it's just a list, and it says, this was me, this is what I want to happen to me, and this is what I want to happen to my stuff. And if you think of it that way, it's not that big a deal. You can make it a big deal if you want. But at the end of the day, for both documents, both sets of documents, you have to have some trust and faith in somebody to exercise or to follow your directions. So I think the hardest conversation that people can have is within the family as to who they might want to appoint. I use myself, for example, my wife and I have them. So I've given her she's my attorney, and in turn I'm her attorney. But that's great, we've got children under the age of 18. But if we're in the same car accident, and we both end up incapacitated and possibly together, there's no one to run around and do the job for us. So we strongly suggest that people have a backup or a successor attorney, plan B. And in many families, husband and wives give the powers to each other, and then if they have adult children, they appoint successor attorneys. There's no rules, it doesn't have to be family, it can be a friend, as long as it's someone they can trust. In many cases, the mothers, if they have daughters, tend to give the personal care and welfare to the daughter on the basic principle that the ladies will understand lady problems and different things. And typically, blokes will appoint their sons. We're all very traditional stereotypes here, but you don't have to. You can appoint anyone you want. And you can have for the property, you can have multiple successor attorneys. So you have the first successor attorney, second successor attorney, third successor attorney, because you don't know that you're all in the same car. So we suggest that you sort of scatter it out, to your wider social circle, just to increase the chances that there's somebody out there who's going to be able to do the job for you. Because it's a very important job. If you're ill in hospital, we had a client who had very serious dementia, but he was able to live in his own home. His family needed to access his savings so that they could secure the property so that he wouldn't wander off and burn the place down. So they had to make alterations, doors and fencers and gates and things. So they needed to be able to access his money. So without an enduring power of attorney, the bank wouldn't have talked to them. But the enduring power of attorney essentially says that the person who's named in the document is the person. So we've had cases where, again, it was a dementia, where the wife didn't know that the husband had a care saver. He got very bad dementia very quickly, had large debts, the debt collectors knocking on the door. Then she discovered he had a $50,000 care saver, which was going to clear the debt problems. So she went to KiwiSaver and they said, no, we have to talk to your husband. You need to pass codes, numbers and passwords and things. But he's not in a position to ever speak again. So she got the enduring power of attorney that fortunately we created for her, went to them and said, yeah, you've got to talk to me. Even then, because even the banks don't even understand these things, they said, no, we've got to talk to your husband. She goes, you can't, he's never going to be able to speak to someone again. So we had to ring them up and talk to the manager, and then they're like, oh, okay. And then the doors opened, they got the money, they resolved a very stressful problem for the wife, which essentially, almost become a widow in a sense because her husband's in hospital permanently. She's got 3 children to look after, get problems. It's a big stress. And these documents go a long way if you plan early enough to help your family out, to help your family care for you they write an appropriate letter saying, we do believe this person has capacity, or they don't. If we have real doubts, and we do sometimes, we will ask for a geriatrician, sort of specialist type person to make this assessment. Presuming they do have capacity, we create the documents. But our other job is to make sure that elder abuse isn't going on. And enduring powers of attorney are a prime tool for elder abuse, because you will get pushy children, grandchildren, daughters-in-law, sons-in-law, who will try and push themselves into a position of authority and be appointed as the attorney. Because if and when you use capacity, they pretty much have unbridled control and access to money and some major decision making regarding your health. So our job is to make sure that, and this happens quite a lot, we get granddaughters bringing in their grandparents and saying they want an enduring power of attorney and I'm going to be the attorney. And our job is to make sure that the wishes of the person before us is that is their real wish and not being bullied or pushed into it by somebody else. And that happens quite a lot. Which is why when it comes to the property, we do really strenuously stress that if you can have more than two people, all the better. If there are disputes about how those powers are being exercised down the road, anybody can go to the family court and have a judge review what's going on. The personal care and welfare only allows you to talk with medical professionals about significant medical decisions, not day-to-day what medicines they're getting and whether they're having paracetamol or ibuprofen. You don't get to micromanage that. The medical professionals do their job, but where there's a major significant decision that they are required to consult on, they will consult the attorney of the person. The property one, because there's usually money involved, the person who's exercising the property power of attorney has to keep records. If they're spending money on behalf of somebody else, they can only do it for that person, not themselves. They can't say, oh, Granddad wants me to buy a new car for myself. That's not the right use of the power of attorney. If there are questions about how the money's being used, again, you go to the family court and have a judge review it, and people can be removed and replaced by the court. If, unfortunately, somebody loses capacity before they've got an enduring power of attorney, there's a set of legislation, and that's where someone has to apply to the court for welfare guardian orders and welfare management orders. It's essentially the same powers that has to be granted by a judge. It can take anywhere from 3 to 6 months, and if you're paying a lawyer for it, you're paying probably $2,000, $3,000, $4,000. And what happens is someone will get dementia, perhaps they're in the hospital. The hospital wants to shift them to a care facility or to respite care. Those organisations won't take people without the enduring powers of attorney or the welfare guardian orders. So if you've got the powers of attorney beforehand, good, it's a seamless transition. If you have to go to court and apply for welfare guardian orders, it gets very stressful because you've got to wait. It's not a fast process. So again, it's the kind of thing, if you can do it early, you can save some family time. Probably talk too long. Maybe 20 minutes. Has anybody got any questions?
Got a question. If somebody has kept or written a will and they haven't told anybody in the family, how would the family knows that there is a will in place? How would we know?
It's a good question, and it's a perennial problem. So, if you don't know, you don't know. But if you suspect that they do, normally most people go to their the person's lawyer and says, hey, you've got a will for so-and-so. Because of the confidentiality and privacy things, lawyers will only speak to the person named in the will as the trustee or executor. Because whatever anybody's put in the will is private until such time as the will is needed, and then the person who's got the powers as the trustee and executor, they then need to exercise it. If there is no will that can be found, then you have to go to court and apply for legal administration. It takes about a year. I mean, again, people are very funny about wills. They feel it's a very private decision, and it has a bit of politics involved sometimes, depending on what you give to who. But we do say to people, when we do wills to people, we make multiple copies, and we certify it as all valid copies. And we suggest to people that they leave it with a person they trust, usually the trustee and executor. But that's a personal choice. We can't make people do that. There's also no national register of wills, so there's no database that you can go and check. So in our little legal world, every week there's little legal newsletters that come out, and there's a list of about 10 to 20 people every week saying, has anyone got a will for any of these people? Someone's looking for a will. So it's a very common problem. So I would suggest that, if you do make a will, make a couple of copies. Because sometimes if a family member who's not getting what they think they should get in the will, they might sort of screw it up and put it in the bin and nobody can find it. But if you've engaged a lawyer, they will have a copy, and someone in the family just needs to tell the lawyer, and then they will make efforts to contact the trustee and executor and get things rolling. So, do you have a question?
Yeah, Mike, is it possible to have more than one executor for a will, or is it just limited to one?
You can have one.
You can have more than one?
You can have, yes, you can have 2, 3, 4.
Right. And they would act jointly and through majority voting?
You have the ability to choose.
Right.
But again, it's one of those things where we think having 2 is good, there's a check and a balance, but 3 or 4 becomes a bit unwieldy. It's usually a 1 or 2 person job, but it's up to the individual. The wills we do, again, we often put in backup ones as well, because, for example, my wife and I have what we call mirror wills. If I die, she gets everything. If she dies, I get everything. If we both die, it goes to the kids evenly, which is a standard kind of will. So we don't, but we should probably have a backup in case both of us pass at the same time, and there's somebody else to be a trustee and executor.
What about enduring power of attorney? Can you have more than one?
For personal care, 1.
No.
For your property, you can have 1, 2, 3, and backups. And you can change them, because if your husband runs off with another lady, he's like, right, he's out. And when he comes back later, he's sorry, you can put it back on. It's up to you. Everybody's different. Your family's different. But what really annoys me is many people in the community go, Mike, I don't have to worry. I've got good kids. They're so well behaved. They don't know what to do. We've got them through university and help them buy a house. They're very good kids. Of course they are, because you're there. Once you're not there, we find that the mask slips a little bit, and you might find your brothers and sisters, they didn't get on as well as you thought. They start to fight and they fall out, or the ladies, the daughters, they go, you stole my boyfriend at high school. I hate you. But if you're not around to moderate their behaviour, your children will change, especially if there's money involved, and especially if there's a disparity within the family. Every family has some kids that shine, and there's some kids that don't shine quite so much, and that can lead to consequences if a member passes. So it all comes down to planning and some forethought on your part. If you want your wishes to be carried through. So personally, I trust my wife, so she knows my mind, how I feel about whether it's religion or my personal health, just my own approach. So she will know what I would want to happen. But also know she'll probably ignore that and choose to do what she wants to do, but that's okay. But you need to have that trust in something. Every family is different. We have some husbands who don't get their enduring power of attorney to their wives. And vice versa. They give it to their brother. And then you get the even trickier situations of blended families. Because you've got other half children, former partners all floating around, and everybody has different no tried and true method. So I see on them, someone making a move on me now, so I'll let them start this.
That was excellent speech, thank you, and I'm sure the community appreciates all your words of wisdom. But before you go, Mike, we have a small token gift, which we would like to send on behalf of United Sri Lanka Association.
Thank you very much.
And Saama for instigating all of this and initiating this whole talk for knowledge series. She started that with this.
Just before I go, can I leave a little pamphlet on enduring basic opportunity? There will be a copy of will, questionnaires, and the two different enduring basic opportunity. I just suggest to you take some, have a read of it, because the questionnaires, I get to school and it only takes about an hour and a half, so I'll give you my speed version. But the questionnaires bring out a number of other things that you need to consider, and we'll find points that you can make in your enduring basic opportunity.
So, what is climate change? So, climate change is the changing of our climate system. So, it alters patterns of weather in relation to change in oceans, land surfaces, and ice sheets over scales and decades or longer. So, climate change can actually be a natural variability. But the thing that we're seeing right now it is anthropogenic. So the heighten of climate change is generally caused by humans, pretty much. And so anthropogenic climate change is actually contributed to the temperature increase caused by greenhouse gases. So greenhouse gases. So greenhouse gases is actually human derived. This is actually the expansion of gases, particular gases, that contribute to warming. This results of atmosphere trapping, radiating heat from Earth towards space. And as you can see, the greenhouse effect over here is sun. So sun tends to reach Earth, and then it gets reflected back. But not all of it. Some of it this way. But some is absorbed and around Earth. And particular greenhouse gases that are caused by humans actually stay within our atmosphere. And so some of the main ones are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and chlorofluorocarbons. Carbon dioxide can be occurred by natural processes such as volcanic eruptions, but the thing about volcanic eruptions is that it isn't as significant, or it is quite rare to occur. But other human activities such as deforestation, land use changes, and burning of fossil fuels is the heighten of carbon dioxide. Land use changes is quite interesting because, especially in New Zealand and Sri Lanka, you can see that agriculture is a huge sector, and so this causes the forest getting deforested and changed into agricultural land is a significant height in carbon dioxide. Methane is another thing which can occur from natural sources and human activities. So this is decomposition of waste in landfills and agricultural, and especially rice cultivation. Agricultural can be cows, so burping and farting of cows actually produces a lot of methane that people don't understand. And New Zealand is really heightened methane because of this reason. So New Zealand has a population of 5 million people, but we produce methane for like over 45 million people. Nitrous oxide is soil cultivation practices, commercial and organic fertilizers, which is the gain from agriculture. And chlorofluorocarbons, to me, is probably one of the worst things you could have. It is aerosol sprays, foam packaging products, solvents, refrigerators, freezers, air conditioning. A lot of these things have this. But the interesting thing about chlorofluorocarbons is probably that it was the reason why part of our ozone layer started cracking. And so the ozone layer is this protective atmospheric layer that we have on our Earth to stop heat radiating into our skins, burning our skin, and just hurting humans in general. And luckily, this was probably a pinnacle point in climate change for people around the world when countries actually got together and created regulations and limitation on the amount of chlorofluorocarbons you can have in these products. So there was a bonus into it. So I like to start off, because I am a geologist, so I look into the past. So we recreate past climate cycles to be able to figure out the key to the future. And one of the main data sets that we actually use right now is this ice core data set that was drilled by some Russian scientists in Antarctica at the base camp of Vostok. So the way that it works is the formation of the glacier results in the transformation of water into ice. And so during this process, which can last from thousands of years, the sediment tends to build up within the ice sheet. So this sediment can be rocks, air, pollen, soil, vegetation, anything really. And so they tend to accumulate into millions of layers in chronological order. So chronological order is the deepest layer would be the oldest and the top layer would be the youngest. So it pretty much creates like a history book of millions of layers of climate cycles. And so over time, the glacier glacier tends to have some of the best evidence because of this reasoning, because it can preserve past climate history due to air bubbles. So the air bubbles trapped within the ice can be removed and analysed really carefully. And so the analysis of this ice core can reveal past atmospheric temperatures, climate variability, and types of vegetation during that framework. So the Vostok ice core was able to create this curve over here, which is a carbon dioxide level from 420,000 years to today. And the reason why this particular ice core is quite important is because this is the only one that we have right now which has significant evidence to show that natural climate variability did occur. So you can see there are peaks and troughs, but it shows us where exactly we are at the current level now and how it's completely heightened. So the climate, the colder periods during the ice age, which is the trough that you see at the very bottom, is the result of decreasing carbon dioxide, whereas warmer periods during interglacial periods is an increase in carbon dioxide. So you can see the rise and fall of carbon dioxide varying from 180 parts per million to 280. So right now we're actually experiencing an interglacial period, which is a warmer climate and heightened carbon dioxide. But so this course is really important for this because you can actually date back so you can use certain particles like bubbles to put a time period into this. And so this is what scientists actually did. So you can see the substantial increase at about here, which was dated back to the Industrial Revolution in 1760. So if no one knows about the Industrial Revolution, it was actually a significant heightened economic history, but it did cause the burning and extraction of fossil fuels, which is coal, oil, and natural gas. And so today, right now, we actually sit at, I looked it up, and we actually sit at 417 parts per million of carbon dioxide, and it continues to increase because of the use of these fossil fuels. And so scientists actually estimate that by 2100, that we will be at about 800 parts per million of carbon dioxide. So, as you can see, this actually causes temperature increase around the globe. And from the 1900s to 2018, we see a significant rise in ocean temperature. We see a significant rise in sea surface temperatures as well. And doesn't necessarily mean it's quite bad for New Zealand, but you can see the northern hemisphere is completely hot. This is about 4 degrees hotter than the northern. And the Arctic is really important because of the ice sheet. It used to be completely ice and now it's starting to melt at unprecedented rates, which results to sea level rise. And everyone in the world will be affected by it. So I wanted to kind of narrow down into 3 really good topics of climate change and some of the effects into Sri Lanka and New Zealand. So one of the things is temperature increase in Sri Lanka. So the number of days past 35 degrees will rise from about 20 days to more than 100 days by the end of this century. So this kind of means that there will be more air conditioning being used, which will increase more greenhouse gases. And in saying that, a lot of Sri Lanka is quite poor, so you will see a lot of people not being able to afford cooling systems as well. And so because of this reason, according to the World Health Organization, by 2080, deaths of elderly people will increase by 22 fatalities out of per 100,000 people. So put it into an estimate close to us, which is 1961 to 1990, it was only 1 death per 100,000 years. And you can see that Sri Lanka will significantly hotter by maybe about 4 degrees than today. So temperature increase in New Zealand isn't necessarily a bad thing. So we will have more days with temperature higher than 25 degrees. So this will mean that the North Island and the coastal South Island will be completely frost-free by 2100. And however, the increased risk of subtropical diseases, mainly by mosquito-borne diseases, will increase and also cause heat stress as well. But, so New Zealand already has a very cool climate, so we actually don't see heat very often anyway, so 25 degrees and higher isn't necessarily a bad thing here. Well, to Wellington at least. So South Island, you will actually start seeing glacial decrease really quickly. So Wellington, currently most of the Wairarapa actually observes more than 24 hot days, and then the Wellington region actually only has 6 hot days. And by 2040, you'll actually see Wellington region, which is us, about 10 to 20 more hot days, and Wairarapa about 30 hot days. So in New Zealand, the climate change projections are to be that the east will be drier and then the west side will be wetter. So sea level rise in Wellington and coastal Sri Lanka. So New Zealand's unique in this way because New Zealand has a lot of tectonic plates around us. And the New Zealand, the landscape is so dynamic. And so some places are actually uplifting and some places are sinking. And Wellington is actually sinking. So Wellington tectonic plates and past earthquakes actually show that we're subsiding quite substantially. So sea level rise will be an issue because on top of that, you'll be getting more water around the CBD and you'll get more water around Petone completely. So New Zealand, between 1891 and 2018, Wellington was actually recorded the highest sea level rise in New Zealand by 2.3 millimeters per year. So so this is actually happening right now, which people obviously don't know because the council constantly has adaptation plans in place, but in saying that, because of the rate that Wellington subsiding, we need to have more scientific evidence to be able to kind of help people out, especially with Tony. In Sri Lanka, I couldn't find a diagram for Sri Lanka, but for Sri Lanka, you'll see that by 2050, they'll experience 0.1 meters, 0.2 meters sea level rise. So people within 1 kilometer of the coast will have to move. And so the water will come within 1 kilometer of the coast. And this will affect 25% of the population right now. And this is a main concern in Sri Lanka because seawater getting into fresh water, which is the main source of Sri Lankan drinking water, will be vulnerable. So you'll get this thing called saltwater intrusions, which we can't actually drink because of the saline. extreme. So this is another really key thing that we'll see is that more frequent floods and droughts will occur in the western and southern regions. And so this was actually a map that was created from the floods that happened in January 2011 in Sri Lanka, and it refers back to the extent of the area that was affected by the 2004 tsunami. You'll start to see, this was just in 2011, so over the years you'll be seeing more floods around the western and the southern region and in a more drastic way. So this, an event that happened was in 2016 and 2017, where more than 500 people died and over 1.3 million people were affected by it. And you'll see that more commonly in Sri Lanka. I'm assuming you actually do see it commonly in Sri Lanka now as well. And this will increase the cyclones by about 10 to 20%. Another problem is droughts. And so over the last 30 years, droughts have actually affected 6 million people already. But one thing is that in Sri Lanka's climate change is that the number of consecutive weak days will decrease while the number of days that are drier increase. So these are some of the regions that will be completely vulnerable to it. And as you can see, this is actually a map of what the storm events or what the annual precipitation already looks like now. So it's roughly from 0 to 240 millimeters of rain per year. But you'll see that Sri Lanka will completely be up to more than 300 to 400 millimeters per year, which is actually a significant amount for a small country like that. Other than the extremes in New Zealand is the northern and the east of the country, like I said, the east gets dry and the west gets wetter, will see significant droughts. And the west coast of the South Island is really prone to get wetter. And so the reason behind this is because warmer climates mean a wetter atmosphere. So the more moisture in the atmosphere, the frequency, the magnitude of floods are expected to increase in landfall in New Zealand. So there are other problems to this, which I always can't tackle into because there's so many, but water resources. So New Zealand actually uses groundwater, so we're already mapping out things like saline intrusion, contamination from agriculture, all these sort of things. But the other problems that we can't seem to tackle really are water quality problems, which like E. coli will heighten with increase in temperature. 25 degrees may not be that hot, but it does do a lot to a climate system that is so used to a colder climate. So that's in New Zealand, and you'll also start to see health impacts. So you'll start to see subtropical diseases like mosquito-borne diseases in New Zealand, and it'll be more prevalent. It doesn't mean that it'll come within our lifetime, but it will. There are other things like heat stress that people should really look into as well. Biodiversity. So New Zealand is very interesting because we have a lot of native species that are already vulnerable right now, but we will start to see extinction of these species because of the loss of habitat due to climate change. We have agricultural productivity issues, which would mean that farmers will have to adapt to different climate systems really, and they'll be constantly changing. They're more prevalent to storms and droughts than us really. And inequalities, you'll see the poor get poorer and the rich, well, not really, the rich probably still get rich. But the ways that you can help, there are certain ways. So the government is doing a lot at the moment, but there are still things that you need, councils and governments need to work together to be able to do. But how the general public can help is save energy, like switching to LED lights will help, choosing a provider that uses renewable energy, and wash your clothes in cold water and air dry instead of using the dryer. It's really important to shop responsibly. So a lot of companies tend to use plastic packaging, they tend to use a lot of fossil fuels to create their products. So selecting products without packaging is ideal, or just use things that you can reuse. Buy second hand and just ask, do you really need it? It's always good to reuse and repurpose. So just having a keep cup for your coffee or your tea, or using a non-plastic water bottle is ideal. Transportation is a really big thing for New Zealand. So walking, cycling, carpooling, switching to electric or hybrid, or using public transportation is really important. So New Zealand is actually ranked the number 3 in the world for the number of road vehicles per 1,000 people. So we have about 837 cars per 1,000 people, and so that roughly contributes 15 million tonnes of carbon dioxide into our atmosphere. And eating wisely, so reducing meat and dairy consumption is a huge thing, especially just cutting from beef to chicken is a big thing. Or just going veggie for 2 days of the week can do a significant amount. So the global food system is actually estimated to contribute about 30% of the greenhouse gases. And half of this actually comes from livestock production. And composting your kitchen and green waste is important, and grow your own veggies if you can, and veggies and fruit if you can. And supporting small and local sustainable source products are important as well. But that's it. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Dushanka, for those who don't know me, and today I'm presenting on a really awesome topic that I'm really passionate about. A bit of background about me: I am a New Zealand registered dietitian, and I've been practicing for the last 4 years. I studied at Massey University, did my Bachelor of Science there and a Master's there, and at the moment I work at Wellington Hospital. So I don't specifically work in diabetes directly at the moment, but it is definitely ingrained in my daily work, as this is a very relevant health issue that everyone has. My first job was actually working as a public health dietitian, delivering group education sessions in diabetes. So thank you for the community for looking after me for the last 26 years, but now it's my turn to support you guys. So please ask any questions during the session. Want to create discussion. If it is a bit of a complex question, I might get you to talk to me at the end or flip me an email, just because I'm going to time cap and I've got a lot to get through today. Diabetes is a very big topic, so is diet and nutrition, so I'm really laying down the basics today. So there's a lot of other complex areas that we can go into, but chat to me after if you'd like to go into more of it, or I can come back for an encore later on. But yeah, let's get started. Oh, actually, before we go into diabetes and diet and all of that, I just wanted to talk specifically about type 2 diabetes. So there are 2 different types of diabetes. One's type 1 diabetes, that's known as an autoimmune condition, which mainly young people get, but you can get it later in adulthood as well. But today we're going to be focusing on type 2 diabetes, which is really, really prevalent in not only the New Zealand population, but definitely in our Sri Lankan community. So how many of you guys know either somebody with diabetes or have diabetes yourself? Yeah, so most of us are in the room. Yeah, a very common issue. And before I move to the next slide, does anybody know what type 2 diabetes actually is? Everybody talks about it all the time, but does anybody have any ideas, or anybody tell us what it is? Don't be shy. Tough crowd.
So pancreas not producing sufficient insulin, or probably the stuff that's being produced is not good enough?
Yes, that is spot on pretty much. Thank you, Tanya. So did everybody hear that? So it said when the pancreas isn't producing enough insulin, or when our insulin isn't really working the way we want it to, pretty much. So I'll just move to the next slide. So that's what I'm covering first for, because before we talk about diet and nutrition, it's really important that we actually know what diabetes is and how it works, because otherwise you won't understand why you need to make dietary changes. It would be pointless. You won't understand why these changes need to be sustained and maintained over time. So what is type 2 diabetes? Pretty much what I'm trying to say is when your insulin doesn't work properly and/or when your body doesn't produce enough insulin. So this, as a result, your glucose remains really high in your bloodstream, and then over time this can lead to type 2 diabetes. So just to break this down into more simpler terms, if you have, say, a food item and that gets digested in your stomach, it breaks down into different molecules. One of those molecules it gets broken down to is glucose, that's known as our sugar. And then over time, when the glucose level builds up in the bloodstream, your pancreas is another organ in your body that goes ding, 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 too much glucose in the bloodstream. We need to try and lower this because too much in the glucose in the bloodstream can be quite dangerous, and we'll go over that soon. Your pancreas will then produce a hormone called insulin. Has anybody heard insulin before? Insulin, yes. So insulin is your hormone which then moves glucose into your cells so that your cells can use glucose as a primary energy source, and that's really important. Sometimes in type 2 diabetes, that insulin, there's either not enough of that made, or that insulin doesn't really work very well. And what I mean by that is insulin kind of works like a key. And in type 2 diabetes, a lot of people have what we call insulin resistance. So that's when your body's kind of resistant to the amount of insulin you make. It's not really working well. And the way that I best like to describe it is like a lock and key model. So if you imagine that your cells, which need glucose for energy, are your lock, and your insulin is your key, your insulin unlocks the cells to let glucose in, to uptake the use of glucose. But sometimes in people with type 2 diabetes, that key might not work. So the cup might be different, doesn't fit into the cell pretty well, and then as a result, the glucose won't be taken up by the cell, it'll just remain in the bloodstream and cause some pretty damaging issues. Does everybody understand that? Is that confusing? No? Okay, ask any questions away. So just to look at the stats, diabetes is a very prevalent issue. About 228,000 New Zealanders have type 2 diabetes, and 8.2% of New Zealand's Asian population have type 2 diabetes, and that's projected to increase up to 10% by 2040. So that Asian population includes us. And diabetes is more common a lot among the Māori, Pacific, and South Asian people. So I hate to say it, but we do have some sort of genetic predisposition, but there's a lot of lifestyle factors that we can do to help with reducing that risk and also helping future generations as well. So the risk factors for type 2 diabetes, if you're European and over 40 years, if you're Māori, Pacific, Asian and over 30 years, as you can see for Asian populations, we have a lower age range, meaning more of us are prone to it in our younger years. If you have a family history of diabetes, or if you have been diagnosed with pre-diabetes, which I'll go over in my next slide what that means. If you're overweight or have truncal obesity, so truncal obesity mainly means an adiposity or fat around your waistline. That is a significant risk factor for having issues with insulin resistance. Sometimes a lot of fat can block the cells and block that key of insulin unlocking the cells because there's a lot of excess body fat there. Also lifestyle factors, things like an unhealthy diet, sedentary if you're not moving much and you don't really get up and go for a walk or exercise, alcohol intake, smoking, and also high blood pressure is an important one. So it's really important to always get your blood pressure checked when you're at your GP, and also get your HbA1c checked, which I will go over very soon as well. So just to kind of, so people know, I'm just going to go over some of the complications of type 2 diabetes. There's a lot of complications, but I'm just going to go over the main ones. So a lot of people say, oh, I've got diabetes, but I'm fine, nothing's wrong with me. But a lot of things that people don't realise is diabetes is what we call a silent predator. So a lot of the times when you get symptoms or complications, by this time a lot of the damage to your blood vessels has already happened, and it happens very silently in the background, and when you get symptoms, that damage can either be permanent or very hard to reverse. So some of those complications include your kidneys. So you've got really small blood vessels that go into your kidneys, and over time, if there's lots of sugar in your bloodstream or glucose, your vessels in your kidneys start to thicken, and then they become leaky, so they don't filter the blood very well, and then you have troubles with removing toxins. And so as a result, that can lead to permanent kidney damage. And then there are a lot of people that have poorly controlled diabetes that come into hospital that need, dialysis, which is kind of cleaning your blood through a machine 3 times a week. And once you get into that stage, that is permanent. So that only progresses worse. There are things that they can do to delay that, but it is really important to know that is a permanent damage that can happen. Another one is you're at an increased risk of heart attacks, about 2 to 4-fold increase in having a heart attack or heart disease. Another one is your retinopathy. So you've got really small blood vessels in your eyes, and over time, when your type 2 diabetes, if it's poorly controlled, the vessels in your blood, in your eyes, will slowly clog up, and you'll get things like blurred vision, and it's really hard to reverse. So once you get those symptoms, by that time, those blood vessels can be quite damaged. So if you do have diabetes, it's really important to get eye checks and talk to your GP about that, especially even if you don't feel like you've had any issues, it's really important to have that checked. And another one is tingling and numbing of your lower limbs and extremities. So you've got lots of small blood vessels that go down to your feet, and over time, if those become clogged, then you don't have a great blood supply down to your feet. And then as a result, you can have things like foot infections, ulcers, pressure injuries, and a lot more as well. So I don't mean to scare you, but this is the reality of diabetes, and it's really important that everybody kind of understands it as well. So, talking about what I said before, checking your HbA1c. Does anybody know what HbA1c means? So it probably is on the slide. Anyone?
So 3-month average of your blood glucose levels.
Absolutely, spot on. You've been doing well today. Very good, very good. So that is, yes, it measures your average glucose over the last 2 to 3 months. So this is different to a blood sugar finger prick. The finger prick only checks your blood glucose in probably 2 hours after a meal. It's a very temporary measure. It's not a permanent measure of what your actual bloodstream is doing or how they diagnose you with diabetes. So if your HbA1c basically stands for glycated hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a blood cell that travels around your body, carries oxygen, and then when you've got sugar in your bloodstream, if sugar attaches onto that hemoglobin, it's called glycated hemoglobin, and they do a measure of that. So they check how much sugar is attached to your hemoglobin in your blood. So a normal reading is less than 40 millimoles per mole. If the pre-diabetes is classed as 41 to 49 millimoles per mole, and diabetes is over 50 millimoles per mole. So what I want to highlight here is if you're in that pre-diabetic stage, it's in that range, it's really important that you try to do as many diet and lifestyle modifications as you can, because you can come back from, instead of progressing into diabetes, you can come back into a normal range, and we'll go over that stuff soon. And if you want personal help, then come talk to me after, so I'm happy to help. So, dietary management of type 2 diabetes. So, if you do have type 2 diabetes, your doctor's going to advise on what the best treatment is for you in terms of your medications, but healthy lifestyle and really good exercise and staying active is really important as well for your overall management. There's only so much medication you can do as well, and you need to play a part on your part, take some responsibility to try and improve your blood glucose, because at the end of the day, it's all about lowering your blood glucose and trying to improve your body's use of insulin. Any questions at all? No? Okay. Right. Actually, before we go to that, can anybody tell me where your glucose comes from your food? Does anybody know? Yeah, your carbs, yeah. Can we have examples of any carbs? Carbohydrates? Rice? Potato, yeah. Another one? Anyone else? Pasta, yeah. Bread, yeah. Great. So a lot of people come to me and say, oh, you know, I've got diabetes, but I don't even have much sugar. I don't even have much sweets or fizzy drink. You know, like, I don't need to worry. But the thing is that you get glucose from so many different types of foods and carbohydrates. So they come from all different carbohydrates, and we will cover that now. So you have your natural sugars. So you've got things from you've got natural sugars in your fruit and your dairy. Does anybody know the type of sugar that's in your fruit, for example? Does anybody know what that's called?
Sucrose.
Yeah, fructose. Yeah, there is some sucrose, yes, as well. Fructose and dairy, it's lactose. So fructose and lactose in our digestion get broken down to what we call glucose. So that's what we use for sugar. Then we've also got glucose that comes from starchy vegetables or carbohydrates. So that's things like corn, kumara, green banana, potato, yams. A lot of people say, oh, like I've swapped out my potato for corn, still giving me carbohydrates, doesn't make a difference, so just know that. Pumpkin is not a starchy vegetable, so that doesn't have any carbohydrates in it. So you can have as much pumpkin as you want, and it's not going to have a detrimental effect on your blood sugars. Then we've also got starches in your breads and cereals. So these include things like your bread, cake, muffins, scones, that sort of thing. Also your cereals, so your muesli, wheat bix, rolled oats, those sorts of things, as well as your legumes. So chickpeas, dal, black beans, as well as like rice and pasta, red rice, brown rice, that sort of thing. And then we've also got our sweets and our added sugars. So these are the ones that you want to limit, obviously, because they are sugars that get digested quite quickly, and I'll explain that soon. But these include things like your fizzy drinks, juice, pizza, pies, sausage rolls, white breads, things like biscuits and sweets and all those sorts of things. So I just want to explain how carbohydrates get digested. So they're kind of classed into what we call high GI and low GI. So some carbohydrates, they get broken down really quickly, and that's because we call them simple carbohydrates. So their molecules are just joined together really easily, and when we have things like white bread or ice cream or biscuits, and it goes into our into our stomach, when they're broken down, those molecules are really easy to break, so they just go down to our bloodstream, and they just kind of cause this rapid spike in our blood sugar, and they drop off really easily as well. So it gives us a burst of energy, and then it kind of drops off really quickly. So it doesn't maintain for very long. And that's kind of what we want to avoid. We want to avoid those really rapid spikes in our blood sugars, because that's over time will lead to our high HbA1c and diabetes. So it's really important that we don't eliminate it fully, but we try to reduce as much as we can, limit it, all in moderation. But we also have foods that are classed as our low GI. So these are our complex carbohydrates, things like brown rice, red rice, lentils, beans. These things have what we can call fibre. Now, what fibre does is that if you were to eat food with lots of fibre, say it was like whole grain bread, digest it, and then the fibre will swell in your tummy and makes like a jelly sort of solution, and then that's really hard to break down. So it takes a really long time for your stomach to try and break down through the fibre, and it will release glucose really slowly into your bloodstream. So that gives you a longer sort of period of energy, and it doesn't cause that much of a spike in your blood sugar. So that's kind of what you want. It's really important. So as you can see, your simple carbs will get broken down really easily. Your starchy or your complex carbs take a long time. So that's what you want really when you're trying to control your blood sugars. Any questions at all? No? Please feel free to ask away. So why do we need carbohydrates? I get a lot of people saying, I've got diabetes, but I'm doing keto now, so it's all good. But that's actually can be quite dangerous. We really actually encourage carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are a really important source of fuel for your body. You need carbohydrates if you have diabetes or not. Diabetes is the main source of energy that our bodies use. It fuels our kidneys, it's our brain, our heart. It's really, really important. There's also a lot of vitamins and minerals that carbohydrates contain, like our B vitamins, minerals like zinc, that you can't get from a lot of other foods. It's really important to have those things in our diet. Also, fibre is a huge part of our bowel health and gut health. So really good, adequate amount of fibre will help with reducing diseases such as bowel cancer, and also promote really good gut health, because it really promotes the bacterial growth in our microbiome, and it's really important. And it also helps to keep our cholesterol levels in check, especially the fibre part. So in terms of carbohydrates, it's really important that we do still include them in our diet, but we know what quality of carbohydrates to go for and what portions to go for. And that's what we'll get into next. So for carbohydrate quality, if we're looking and breaking it down into sections, there's so much to go over in terms of snacks and drinks, but I just thought I'd just kind of nut it down to just the main foods for now. But for your fruit and added sugars, obviously I'm going to say limit added sugars as much as possible, because they are simple carbohydrates. They are things that break down really easily, cause those rapid spikes in blood sugars. So what I recommend is trying to aim for things that have a bit more fibre, that are going to keep you fuller for longer. So those things include things like, for your fruit, for example, your fresh fruit, any frozen fruit or tinned fruit and juice are good options to go for, because they've still got fibre content in there. And the fibre, as I said, will swell in the tummy, release the glucose slowly. But then to avoid things like juice. So a lot of people also say to me, I've cut off my fizzy drinks, but I have juice in replacement. It's pretty much the same thing. The amount of sugar that you have in your juice is actually quite equivalent to the amount of sugar that's in a fizzy drink. So that's really important to just know, because the juice is pretty much a concentrated source of sugar. It's had all fibre removed once it's been juiced. Also dried fruit. So dried fruit, once it's dried, the fibre is diminished, again, a concentrated source of sugar. So we don't want, that's something that's going to be really high in sugar. Things like your spreads, like your honey, lollies, biscuits. One thing about honey that I notice a lot of Sri Lankans do, and I mean it could be a lot of other people, but because I always get to that, that a lot of people say, I've replaced my sugar in my tea with honey. You're still putting a concentrate, even though honey is a more natural source of sugar, it's still going to be the exact same amount of sugar that you're putting into tea. It's still a concentrated source of sugar. So it's just important to kind of think about that when you're trying to make healthy swaps. The dairy, trying to go for low-fat options as well. So low-fat, reduced fat, or low-sugar yogurts. In terms of the fat content, it's important to be trying to aim for lower-fat foods, because obviously high-fat foods over time can lead to weight gain, which then can lead to what we call insulin resistance, which is what I mentioned before. So it's really important to try and for low-fat options. So trying to avoid things like your flavoured milk, high sugar yogurts, ice cream, that sort of thing. All your breads and cereals, as I mentioned before, the high fibre is the best. So whole grain breads and cereals, as much grains and seeds and wholemeal flour as possible is the aim. Wholemeal pasta, brown rice, red rice, quinoa, wholemeal roti, if you can do that. Baked beans, chickpeas, plain popcorn, that sort of thing is going to be more high fibre options. Trying to avoid things like your white breads or sweetened breads, things like cornflakes or rice bubbles that don't have any fibre in them, even though the carbohydrates have got a fibre, so they won't keep you full for very long. And then also your starchy vegetables. So things like your kumara, corn, potatoes, still fun to have. I advise to keep the skins on if you can, because that's where the fibre is, and that's what will keep you fuller for longer. So if you can keep the skins on, like even if you're doing mashed potatoes and that sort of thing, kind of keep the skins on. Some people don't t-shirt that up to you. And try not to cook it with lots of butter and loading it with coconut cream and that sort of thing. That's when you find that you can have a more high-fat sort of meal. In terms of what I'm advising today, this is only directed to diabetes, so if you have individual kind of health conditions where you can't eat some of these foods, that's understandable as well. You can ask me after for more individualised stuff tailored for you. And then carbohydrate portions. So the Ministry of Health recommends at least 6 servings of carbohydrates in a day. And a lot of people do say, oh, like that's a lot. But it's really important to know what carbohydrate portions actually are and how it adds up over time. So, for example, starchy vegetables, 1 small potato is considered 1 serve, or half a green banana. I know that's not very common for our culture, but that would be considered 1 serve, or half a small kumara is 1 serve. For your breads and cereals, that's things like 3 crackers is 1 serve, 1 slice of bread is 1 serve. So if you think about your whole daily intake, that can add up. And in terms of your other starches, things like your rice, pasta, 1/3 of a cooked cup of rice is 1 serve. So, rice is a huge part of our daily life. A lot of us, it's a staple food for our community, but 1/3 is 1 serve. So if you're having 2 cups of rice, it's up to 3 or 4 serves of carbohydrates in just your dinner meal. And then that means that you make up after 2, you're likely to go over your servings for the day in your upbringing. So it's just really important to kind of think about. So a great way and guide to try portion out your carbs and try have really regular balanced meals is the healthy plate model. Has anybody seen this before? Yeah? Yeah, down the back. You've seen it before? Great. So the healthy plate model, this was released by Diabetes New Zealand, and it's a great way. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach, so it's just a guide to start thinking about how you portion out your meals. So what they recommend is half of your plate should be your non-starchy vegetables. So this is anything like your eggplant, carrot, pumpkin, green beans, broccoli, cauliflower. Those are all non-starchy. They're not going to affect your blood sugar levels. So you can have as much of them as you want. Also, they do have some fibre, which is great because that will also help with keeping you full. And then 1/4 of your plate should be your carbohydrate portion. So a lot of people might have this the other way around where 3/4 of their plate, the carbohydrate options. So 1/4 of your plate is your carbohydrate portion, and that includes things like your potato and your kumara and your rice. It's not 1/4 of rice and another 1/4 of potato. And so it's just important to keep in mind when this isn't, as I said, going to be for everyone. It's just a guide to slowly work towards that. And then 1/4 is your protein. So your protein is really important because that also, when you have protein paired with your carbohydrates, that also slows the digestion of glucose. And your protein includes things like your meat, chicken, fish, tofu, paneer, all of those protein options. So say you're serving up a meal at night time and you've got, your brown rice or red rice, I hope, 1/4 of the plate, and then, 1/4 of the plate could be your meat curry or tofu curry or egg curry, and then the other half should be all your other things like your bonchi and all your other kind of non-starchy vegetables like salads and green beans and all of that stuff. So, and a lot of people will say, oh, I'm just concerned that I'll get hungry after this, because I need my carbohydrates to stay hungry. The thing is, give it a go, because the amount of fibre that you have from a half a plate of non-starchy vegetables should keep you full for longer. And also, you can still have snacks after your meals. That is completely okay as well. And it's important to distribute carbohydrates evenly throughout the day as well, and try not to have all balanced in one meal. So the recommended amount of carbohydrates per meal is about 30 grams, and at a meal it's about 15 grams. I can give you more context to this if you talk to me individually. I just don't have time to go into it today. How much of the time? Okay, 5 minutes. Great. So other healthy lifestyle habits that I don't have time to talk about today, but I will just briefly touch on. Managing your weight. So if you are somebody that you feel that you could lose a kilo or 2, that makes a significant difference to your blood glucose control. So every 1 to 2 kgs of weight loss that you have, and this is for people that are overweight or might have some truncal obesity. This is not for anyone that's underweight. I don't recommend any weight loss, but if you do have room in your weight to move, reducing your weight by 1 to 2 kilos can significantly increase your blood glucose management by 5 to 10%. So it makes a really significant difference only by a little bit of weight loss. Drinking lots of fluids. So a lot of people may think that you're really hungry all the time and you need food, but a lot of it is actually needing to quench your thirst. So when you are hungry, try and really have a glass of water. And if you're looking for different drink options which still get that sugary taste and you're starting to wean off sugar, it can be really difficult, especially if you're used to it. So there are things like flavoured water drops, which you can buy at the supermarket. This isn't artificial sugar, but you can add a couple of drops just to get that flavoured taste, or dilute some juice down to reduce the amount of sugar, or have diet drinks to start off with, if that's absolutely fine as well. Exercise, so try to be active. When you exercise, your muscles contract, so they try to really encourage the uptake of glucose and reduce it in the bloodstream. So you make a significant difference from just walking 20 minutes around the block. That's all you need to do to start off with. And then, it doesn't have to be super strenuous, but just keep active, get those muscles moving. Snacking sensibly, so try not to overdo it with the snacks. I can send my PowerPoint slides around, and I can also send out some certain snack options because I just don't have time to talk about it today. But it's really important to make sure that when you're snacking, you're also having the right amount of carbohydrates and you're thinking about the quality of the carbs that you're having as well. And trying to limit your high sugar fatty foods, so those things like your processed takeaway foods as much as possible. If you have fish and chips on Friday night, whether you can swap it out for a salad and some chips and some fish that isn't being deep fried in oil and baked fish instead. So there's lots of different options that you can do. And just to finish off, I'll send these slides off, but I just wanted to do a quick basic guide to label reading. Does anybody find it difficult to read the labels in the supermarket when they're looking at things? Yes? Yeah? So what a really good handy tool to use is called the 10-10-6 rule. I'm just going to go over it. This is very basic and it doesn't apply to everything, but you can use it as a general guide. So the 10-10-6 rule pretty much means that you look at the per 100 gram column, and you mainly use this for your breads, crackers, cereals, your starchy stuff, but it doesn't really apply to things like your drinks, like your juice and milk. So only use it for your breads, cereals and crackers. But you look at your per 100 gram column, and your fat should be less than 10 grams per 100 grams. Your sugar should be less than 10 grams per 100 grams, and your fibre should be over 6 grams. And that kind of gives you a general guide to know if that is kind of low sugar, low fat, but really high fibre food that you can have. And you find that, Wheat Bix will comply, things like the Huntley and Palmer's Vital Wheat crackers comply. There are a lot of crackers that comply. If it's only a few grams up, or either side of these, it doesn't really matter. It just gives you a general guide. So you can always use that. There is also an app called Food Switch. So if you don't have time to do lots of label reading, because sometimes people are in a rush, you can use a Food Switch app, which you can scan the barcode, and it gives you like a better option or a more healthier option, specifically with carbohydrates and fats as well, and fibre. So that is probably all I have time to talk about today. Thank you. Any quick round of questions at all?
Artificial sweetness, does it, what's the impact of sugars?
Yeah, good question. So the one you just asked, what's the impact of artificial sweetness? So artificial sweeteners, they're a tricky one because basically you have all your diet drinks where you have artificial sweeteners like stevia and things that you can add to your foods. They will not impact your blood sugar levels at all. So if you're someone that always has a lot of sugar in your diet and you're trying to wean off it, it's a good interim option to go for. It obviously it tastes different, and people notice that, but it does give you that sweetened taste without impacting your blood sugar levels. Over time, however, if you have too many artificial sweeteners over a long term, it can affect your gut health. And it has been linked to show that it can significantly affect the growth of your microbiome, like some of the bacteria in your gut. So what I recommend is if you're using it in the interim just to wean off sugar, so for like a month to 3 months, that's okay. But really long period of time, especially with especially when you're trying to wean off sugar and you are also trying to reduce that craving for sweetness. So if you're always replacing with artificial sweetener, it's also going to become difficult to wean off it completely. So you just have to try your best and try things like herbal teas and drinks. And yeah. Any other questions? I just got my email there at the bottom. Hettige@gmail.com. Easy one to remember. You can ask me after. So if you have any specific questions, you can email me or cool. All right. Thank you.
Talk is a balanced lunch, so. Nimesha, please take this.
Okay, everyone, can you hear me? Yes, no, it's good, yes. Okay. I also have a tendency to talk really fast, just because of the way that my brain processes things, so if I'm going too fast, let me know. But what a wonderful initiative by USLA. This is so cool to just share information. Are you guys feeling a little overwhelmed? I mean, you had a lot of information, so I want everyone to just take a deep breath with me. Take a deep breath, inhale. 2, 3, 4, and hold at the top. 2, 3, 4, exhale. 2, 3, 4. Okay, good. Roll your shoulders. Okay, good. All right. Okay, so right, the slides. If you could just put it on for me. Hi everyone, my name is Nimesha Tissera and I'm a mental health educator and a wellbeing strategist, and so today I'll be talking about mental health and good therapy. And so before I get going, we are talking about subjects like mental illness and mental health and therapy. So because of that, it can stir some strong emotions within us, and so if that's the case, I've got some awesome flyers that have been handed out. So please make the most of those helplines that are listed in the flyers. There are trained counsellors and people who are able to kind of talk you through any strong emotion that kind of arises so that you feel settled and that you're able to get on with your day. So with that being said, we often think of mental health as kind of separate from our physical health, but this is about it's about time that we realise that it's not just somewhere out there, it's actually really in our bodies. So just like Dushi was talking about, she talked about how like diabetes might affect the kidneys. The part of the nervous system, the part of the body that is affected by our mental illness is the nervous system. Alright, so here you go. You can see the nervous system, and that goes from head to toe. Which means that mental illness is very real and very something not to be taken lightly. Okay, so your nervous system is made up of your brain, your spinal cord, and you also have all of those nerves in your body from head to toe. And so your nervous system is responsible for pretty much every single, all of the other systems within our bodies. So it affects our digestion, our heart rate, our pretty much every single thing that goes on in our body has to go through our nervous system. And so you can see that if somebody's struggling with a mental health condition, it actually really affects our entire systems, and it can be really debilitating and requires us to kind of, change up our lifestyle so that we can support ourselves better. And you'll see that, okay, sorry about this slide, I'm really not the best person for this, okay, so mental health conditions can be really disabling because it does go from head to toe, right? So all of our muscles, everything is affected by our nervous system. So you can see here, mental illness is the leading cause of disability worldwide. So like on planet Earth here, as Nimthara was talking about, it is the leading cause of disability. It actually stops us from physically being able to move, sense our surroundings. It stops us from engaging with our environments, and so it's a really disabling thing. So let's just define what mental illness is. Mental illness is characterized as a change in our moods, our thoughts, or our behaviors, okay, and basically these changes make life really difficult. Like it's very challenging to live a life that we find meaningful when we're going through mental health conditions, because they affect our work life, they can affect our home lives, they can affect our, if you're at school, maybe you're not able to get the same grades that you were able to, or maybe you're not even able to attend, because again, it's very physical and it can be a really crippling disability. So there's really nothing good about mental illness except for the fact that it's treatable. Like any other medical condition, mental illness is also treatable, and we can find there's so much supports available in order to regulate our nervous systems back to a space where we feel safe and we can function normally as well. And it also helps if you identify it earlier on, although that's not necessary. At any stage of your healing journey, there are supports available. And actually, it's kind of shocking because the facts, there's one fact that says, this is cross-culturally, not just in our communities, but it takes between 1 and 8 years to get seen by a mental health professional after the first onset of symptoms. And this is for a lot of reasons, mainly people don't understand what mental illness is and how that can affect our bodies. And there's also a lot of stigma, like the media portrays various messages about people being mentally ill, and then that makes them unapproachable or violent or dangerous. All of those things are myths, and it's such a shame, because we can really feel more supported if we get access to those mental health professionals sooner. So why do we develop mental illness? Mental illness can happen to anyone who has a brain and a nervous system. And the science suggests that it's a combination of genetic and environmental factors. And no one really likes to say that it's in our genes, because our genes are, nothing less than perfect. But the truth is that, so I've got the slide about epigenetics, and that's because our environment can affect our genetic material. So that epigenetics is the science of how our environment can affect our genetic material. And as a population, South Asian people, including us, Sri Lankans, we've gone through a lot of things in our environments, like historically speaking, such as war, slavery, discrimination, racism. All of these things have put our bodies and nervous systems into a dysregulated state. When we feel fearful, you've noticed that your nervous system goes into kind of gives a whole different response. And so over generations, our nervous systems have been through a lot, and the way in which mental health conditions are expressed differ generationally as well as culturally, based on what's going on in the environment for any individual. Okay, so just got a slide about trauma. So what is trauma? So trauma is our nervous system or our body's response to our environment. So if we experience a traumatic incident, this can be like a car accident or some of those things that I listed off before, like war, PTSD or exposure to anything violent, that sort of stuff, our nervous systems can become really affected. And so what happens is, over time, over generations, that nervous system can be passed on, because now remember, through epigenetics, our DNA has been modified, and so our environments can actually control the expression of various genes and how active that dysregulated nervous system will be given any particular situation. So dysregulated nervous systems have been kind of passed down, and so we have these trauma. It's like not uncommon for us as a population population to experience these, have these bodily reactions that fit under what trauma would be called. Yeah, so this is a slide about intergenerational trauma, and I like this diagram because it shows the 3 generations and how, you know, for example, the top generation, the grandparents, you can see they've experienced war and possibly violence, abuse, things like that. And because it's there's been not enough information or lack of supports, they end up, it kind of gets passed down to the next generation. So because the second generation kind of deal with the lack of healing or support for the generation before, there are side effects for the generations that go on, and then again, mental illness might be expressed, and just kind of has a flow-on effect. But we can break the cycle by seeking support, and you know, there's so much help out there, which is why it's such a shame to not be able to access it. So what can we do about it? We can seek therapy. Okay, so you can go and see your GP initially, or you can seek help from a counsellor, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a trauma therapist. There's so many people and so many professions which all deal with things slightly differently. I may not have time to get into all of that there, but as long as you get into the system some way, shape or form, you'll be directed, and you can also look online and you can also talk to me afterwards if you're interested. And so what is therapy? Therapy comprises of assessment, so a mental health professional will assess you and then provide you with a treatment plan. And that treatment plan is dependent on the therapist. Each therapist has specific like modalities of treatment that they prefer to use. So some people would like CBT, other people are more versed in another kind called DBT. And so, you know, based on what your condition is, there are evidence-based practices that are known to heal and help your condition. So you want to be well informed about those things. So therapists work in different ways, and different therapists have different treatments that they prefer. So how do you know if you might benefit from therapy? You guys can read that on the screen. If you can't, I'll read it out right now. So these are some of the signs and symptoms. We don't have to have all of these signs and symptoms to seek help, but if you've been feeling sad or down or fearful for a couple of weeks or more, if you feel confused in your thinking, or you just find it difficult to concentrate, if you're feeling fearful, or you're just consistently worried, or you have excessive guilt about a situation, a person, or something like that, if you experience mood changes, highs and lows, or you act kind of out of character, you have like outbursts. Another sign is if you feel like withdrawing from friends and family, or you kind of tend to isolate, you find yourself wanting to isolate more and more. If you feel really tired, low energy, difficulty with problems, or problems sleeping, and some other symptoms, detachment from reality. So these are things called delusions, paranoia, hallucinations. We don't have time to get into those. I'm not going to describe exactly all of those symptoms, but if you're interested, you can look them up or talk to me after. If you also have difficulty with coping with your daily problems, or just experience a lot of stress, and if you have trouble understanding relating to situations and to people, or if you're finding yourself leaning towards drugs or alcohol more than you typically would, or whatever, you're starting to use those things as a way to kind of alleviate the symptoms. You might also experience major changes in your eating habits, and you might have suicidal thinking. And so you definitely don't need all of these symptoms to seek help. If you have one or two, just, start the process, because finding a good therapist, all of that takes time as well, and you want to maximize your chances of good recovery. And many times people do. And also, because we're a South Asian culture, it's well researched that we tend to talk more about our bodily symptoms. Like we complain of headaches more, we complain of like digestive issues, we complain of like my back sore, my stomach sore. Whereas
Western groups, they tend to talk more about their feelings, and they say like, oh, I feel this way, or I can't stop thinking about this. And so with us as well, something to be mindful of is if we tend to experience more headaches regularly, if we're having like, aches and pains that keep coming up, or they don't seem to be resolving themselves, it can actually be a sign. Again, remember, mental health affects our entire nervous systems, so you're bound to have some physical symptoms too. So, yeah. And why is therapy important? Like, there are lots of self-help books, self-help strategies. What's the difference between those things? And the difference between seeking help yourself and reading a book, that's well understood. It's only helpful at a certain level of distress. And so, because with a therapist, you build a therapeutic alliance, and they're there to monitor your progress. You can raise your concerns with them. You can say, oh no, I don't think this is working for me. And remember, with therapy, you're kind of starting to discuss things, your feelings that have been repressed for ages. And so when you do that, you kind of open up this big can of worms, and you need somebody who is a professional who can contain those experiences without, because sometimes if you guys have experiences when you talk about something with people that you care about and they don't know how to receive it in the best possible way, you end up feeling worse for having said it than, not. So you get this luxury with therapists, you get this, they know how to contain your experiences, they know how to make you feel seen, they know how to make you feel heard, and you often go away feeling healed as opposed to like more traumatized. And so it is a very, it's really highly recommended to go to a therapist. And yeah. Okay. How to get into therapy? Well, you can look online, and this concept of shopping for a therapist is a good one. Just because you find one doesn't mean that they're the one that's going to work for you, because each therapist has a different approach to administering a different therapy or whatever, so you want to make sure that they seem relatively compatible with you. And the way you can do that is by getting before and just asking them about their experience. Have you dealt with South Asian people before? Do you know a bit about how we work as a group? That sort of thing, or asking them, have you dealt with this issue before? And just getting an indication of their experience on your particular subject, that's really helpful. A 10-minute call, if they decline a 10-minute call before, run a mile. You don't want to have anything to do with them, because then you need someone who has that kind of caring nature. And yeah, so look at their specialities, don't be afraid to ask for their experience in the area, and if a good therapist knows what their scope is. So if you exceed their scope, they should recommend someone else, and they'll have colleagues and things that they might be able to recommend for you. So you build a good trusting relationship with your therapist, and remember, it's a two-way street. Okay, so sometimes, especially in South Asian cultures, we have this tendency to, whoever's wearing like the white coat, or whoever's the doctor, whoever's the professional, we kind of just take on board whatever they say. But if you have a concern about what somebody's suggesting, or if they say, you try this, and then you go try that, and you can clearly tell it's not having any effect, or you're concerned about how that's going to impact X, Y, and Z, it's okay to talk back, and it's okay to say, doc, or, to talk to your therapist and say, I have concerns about how that's going to happen. If I try to apply that in my relationships, I don't think that will go down well. Because having that two-way conversation is really important, because the therapist is not a mind reader. Yes, a psychology degree doesn't mean you can read people's minds. So they're still humans, and they need you to go back and forth with them and explain how effective the treatments that they're recommending are, because they're the ones who are able to modify the dose, change it up. And so, yeah, it's a really therapeutic relationship is a collaboration and not just a one-way street. So the power dynamics, in South Asian cultures, we often don't want to question authority figures, but like this is your health, and you guys deserve the best quality care. So, you know, don't be afraid to speak up. If you find it difficult to speak up, you can also email your therapist after the session, or you can get a friend or a person that you trust to advocate for your needs. And the therapist should ideally attend cultural supervision, because this is something that is now, like, therapy's changing up where you need a lot more cultural supervision, because what we're finding is that the things that are recommended to by, say, like a white therapist to people of our culture, there's sometimes a mismatch between what's actually applicable. So, for example, if you are aware that, you know, a Western therapist often will recommend things like, you know, doing things on your own, that sort of thing. So if they recommend that you go and, you know, do something completely on your own, or you move out or whatever, that may not be as suitable given the context of how we work. We work in packs, we work together collectively. So you need someone who cares to learn about that stuff, or who is of a similar background to make sure that the treatment doesn't actually do more harm than, you know, good. How do you know when you no longer need therapy? It's good to have these markers, so then we can know when and what to do. When you start to feel connected to yourself, you kind of have a sense of who you are. Oh, yeah, I know who I am. You feel safe, and you don't feel as fearful. You feel confident. You have good self-esteem. You feel connected socially, and you feel like you belong at least somewhere. You know, you feel like connected to other people. And you also have supports in place for when you do get emotionally distressed. You know what to do about that. You know how to regulate your nervous system, bring it back to a place of calm. And you're managing to complete all your day-to-day tasks without a sense of, you know, feeling burnt out or really distressed emotionally, or without feeling really fearful or scared. Yeah, that's the last slide, but I just got some other tips for you guys. So, you know, therapy is expensive, and typically, you know, a psychologist will charge between $120 to $180, sometimes even $200 per session. And I mean, in the defense of a good therapist, you see them for that 1 hour session, but they end up doing about 2 to 5 hours work for you behind the scenes for that session, because they have to prepare, they have to plan, they assess, draw conclusions from the assessment, calculate a treatment plan, and then they have to like research which treatments they're getting cultural supervision, they're getting professional supervision to make sure that they're giving you the best quality care. So it's not just that 1 hour that you're paying for, and I've done maths. So if you divide it up between, it ends up being you're paying $36 for that 1 hour face-to-face time as well, where they're attending to you. So, but you deserve the best quality care, and the good thing is that many therapists have sliding scales, so you can actually just tell them, hey, I'm experiencing some financial hardship. What can you do for someone who has a salary of this amount? And so a lot of therapists, because they're not really in it for the money anyway to begin with, people in this profession, you know, but you know, so they tend to have discounts for people who are experiencing financial hardship, or they'll be able to do a sliding scale based on your income. You pay a lesser amount or more or whatever, and they can negotiate payment plans, blah blah blah, with you. So just ask. And what might session 1 look like? So if you find a good therapist, you feel like you've had a good phone conversation with them, they seem like they attend to my needs and they can handle me, you go into the session, what can you expect? You'll expect, well, there'll be a therapist with a pen and pad, and that pen and pad is there to simply jot down all of the important things, the places that they feel that they can intervene and like plan a treatment for you. So you can take someone with you, and I recommend doing that because you're about to talk about things that probably you've kept in or felt ashamed of for a long time, and so sometimes it's nice to have someone to get you going or fill in the blanks when you're speaking, that sort of thing. So you can take along someone with you, there's nothing wrong with that. And then they will ask you, you know, so what's brought you here? And then that question seems daunting, so if you don't know the answer, you can just say, I don't know, and then they should technically guide you, they should technically lead you and ask, you know, how have your, you know, how's your work life been, how's your school life or your relationships, how they've affected, and they should be able to tease out these answers. And if they don't do that, get a new therapist, because that's on them. So yeah, and the number of sessions that you might need to attend depend on the therapy of choice. So I'll just give you an example for cognitive behavioural therapy. That's like a standard treatment for depression or anxiety, and it's case dependent, but you usually see someone for about 20 sessions, 15 to 20 sessions, and that can obviously be modified based on your particular circumstance. But so a good therapist will know when to terminate therapy. They don't just kind of keep you going if there's no progress. And so sometimes what can happen is like people become quite attached to their therapist because they've been seeing them for a while. But it's important that the therapist lets them know when it's ready to, like we're moving on now. The aim is not to remain in therapy for the rest of your life. And just the last couple of things, so a good therapist has a sense of cultural humility, and I think we're moving away from this in a lot of the medical and health professions, talk about cultural competency, which kind of implies that you can be competent on a certain culture, but really we're moving towards cultural humility, which is like, I don't really know exactly what's going on for you. Even if we have the exact same culture, remember, they have the expertise, but you are the expert of your life and your story and your experiences. So you can say, right, well, if they're telling you, this is happening, you can say, well, this is what I feel inside my body, my heart is racing, whatever is going on for you, you express your truth. And so, so remember, it's important to note that not every therapist is fit for you, but don't let that deter you from looking for one. And you can email your therapist in between sessions, so if there's been some major shift in your life, or you think, oh gosh, I need to talk to someone, tell them about this because this is affecting me, email them in between sessions. That can also help you maximize, you get a better bang for your buck, because ideally if the therapist is able to, they will have read that email before you get to the session, so they can guide you while you're in the session based on what they've read. And that's all I have today. All of these, when we talk about health, it can be so like, oh my God, doom and gloom. But the point is to be like, no, we have so much that we can do about it. So like, please, if you just have any concerns about you or your loved ones, get them into healthcare. And I know that's a whole other different conversation. Not everyone we love wants to be in those places, but if you feel any emotional distress or it's gone on for a certain period of time, try what you can. Do it, and then I'll see you in therapy. It's like, and we only get so far alone. And mental illness leads us to isolate, and what we need is community care. So we need more than one person. It's like if somebody had a heart condition, you wouldn't just let them be like, okay, you just try whatever you can try. Sometimes they need some surgery, or they need someone else to come in and support them. So there's no shame in that, and it's cool because we can actually regulate our nervous systems, and recovery is possible. So thank you very much. I think we're over time, everyone's starving. So if you guys want, you can ask me questions, I'll be floating around. And I have my little card which gives you my email address if you want to contact me at all.
Okay, guys, don't rush off yet. So Nimesha, thank you very much for that presentation. Hey guys, the recording of all these speeches will go on Facebook and probably on the Sri Lanka New Zealand side, and we will share the material that these ladies have put together with everyone, and I think that'll be great. So on behalf of USLA, I'm really happy to see such a crowd. I counted about 55 people, which is great. This is our first in the series of Knowledge for Thought, and it's our growth opportunity for the community to bring these very talented individuals and Mike to come and talk to us about various diverse topics. I hope we can repeat this again in another 2 months' time with another series of topics which we're thinking of cyber security, how to run a business, running a listed New Zealand company, which Sri Lankans have done, and how to start a business from the scratch and evolve. And some people are running small businesses and some are running large listed companies. So we'll bring all of that together and we'll package that as a series of talks as we go through. Thank you everyone for coming. Come and enjoy some lunch, which is, I think, a balanced diet. Remember those portions on your plate? If you can. Thank you.